I will not leave you orphaned. I am coming to you. In a little while, the world will no longer see me, but you will see me because I live. You also will live. On that day, you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. They who have my commandments and keep them are those who love me. And those who love me will be loved by my Father, and I will love them and reveal myself to them. The word of the Lord. Sometimes in life there's a moment when you just realize you're not as alone as you thought you were. Now, yesterday we had graduation at the college, big crowds, lots of cheering. But you know, the start of the college journey can be a little rougher. And I had a mom tell me once about dropping her son off at college. There she had spent 18 years doing all the things mothers do, packing lunches, reminding him about his homework, staying up late when he was sick, cheering at games, worrying when life got hard. And then all of a sudden, she said, I found myself standing in a parking lot in the dorm, watching him walk away into a brand new life. And she smiled bravely and she waved until he disappeared into the building. Then she got in her car and started to cry. Not because she thought she'd failed him, just the opposite. She had done her job, but she wondered, will he be okay without me being right here? That's when her phone buzzed. It was a text from her son. It said this, thanks, Mom. I've got this. Love you. She told me in that moment she realized something had shifted. She wouldn't physically be there anymore, but everything she had poured into him, her guidance, her love, would still be with him. In a way, she was still helping, just a little differently now. And that's not a bad way to think about this passage in John, because Jesus is preparing his disciples for a moment just like that. Historically, this part of John's gospel takes place late in Jesus' ministry. He's gathered with his closest followers, and he knows something that they're only beginning to sense, that he will not be physically there with them much longer. They've left everything to follow him. They've left their jobs. They've left their families. They've depended on his being present, his teaching, his leadership. And now he's telling them things are about to change. You can imagine the anxiety in the room. What happens when the one who has guided us to this point is no longer going to be here? Jesus says he'll send an advocate. The word used is paraclete, not the little bird, but a paraclete. It's one of those words in Greek that doesn't translate that well or that easily into English. Now, depending on your translation of the Bible, it might be translated as advocate or helper or counselor or comforter. And each of those words gets at part of it, but none of them quite capture the fullness of it. In the ancient world, a paraclete was someone who stood alongside you. Think of a legal advocate who speaks on your behalf, with a trusted guide who walks with you through times of uncertainty, or a friend who shows up when everything is falling apart. A friend who says, you're not facing this alone. That's a paraclete. And that's the promise that Jesus is making. He's saying, in essence, I may not be physically here in the same way, but you will not be abandoned. There will be a presence with you, God's own Spirit that will continue to guide, to comfort, and to advocate for you. This is deeply personal because the disciples are about to step into a world that will challenge them. They'll face fear, confusion, opposition, and doubts. They'll need courage that they don't yet know that they have. And Jesus is telling them, you won't need to manufacture that on your own. The Spirit will be here with you, right alongside you. This is something we still wrestle with today. We often want God's presence to be obvious, to be tangible. We want clear directions. We want visible reassurance. We want something that we can point to and say, there it is. But much of the time, the Spirit works much more like that mother's influence in her son's life. Steady, quiet, shaping from within. It might show up as a nudge towards compassion where it would be easier to turn away. It shows up as courage when we might feel outnumbered with people who don't like our faith. It shows up as comfort in moments when we didn't think that we would make it through. It's not always loud, but it is always real. And this is where Mother's Day gives us a beautiful lens for understanding all of this. Because at their best, mothers embody something very much like what Jesus is describing. They advocate for their children. They guide them even when the path isn't clear. They comfort them when the world feels overwhelming. They stand beside them, sometimes physically, sometimes from a distance, but they don't disappear. Think about how many of us, even as adults, still hear our mother's voice in our head. Maybe it's a word of caution. Maybe it's an encouragement. Maybe it's a reminder of who we are when we start to forget. A voice that doesn't vanish just because circumstances change. In a similar way, the Spirit carries forward the presence of Christ in our lives, not as a replacement, but as a continuation. And there's something important. This promise isn't just about comfort. It's also about calling. Because the Spirit doesn't simply make us feel better. The Spirit moves us onward. Just as those disciples were sent into the world, we too are shaped and sent into the world that we encounter. The advocate becomes the one who teaches us to advocate for others. The comforter forms us into people who comfort others. The guide leads us so that we can help guide others. That's part of what love looks like in action. Jesus connects love and obedience in this passage, not as a burden, but as a natural outcome. When we are rooted in love, our lives begin to reflect that love. And the Spirit is what makes that possible, especially when a life is difficult. Because, as we all know, loving others is not always easy. Offering compassion when we're tired or when we're frustrated can feel like more than we're able to give. Advocating for someone who is overlooked or mistreated can be uncomfortable. But we are not left alone to do it. The Spirit steps into those gaps. And if we circle back to that image of a mother, we see that pattern again. Mothers often give in ways that go unnoticed. They show up again and again, offering guidance, support, and care, even when it's not acknowledged, even when it's hard. They become, in a very real sense, a living example of what it means to stand alongside someone. Of course, we also recognize that Mother's Day can be complicated. Not everyone has experienced that kind of nurturing presence. Some of us carried grief or scars or absence with our mothers. And that's where the promise of the Spirit matters even more. Because the presence of Jesus describes isn't limited by human relationships. It reaches into every life, every situation, offering that same advocacy, guidance, and comfort. It meets us where we are. So maybe the question today is this: where in our lives do we need that presence right now? Where are we feeling uncomfortable or alone or overwhelmed? And can we begin to trust, even a little, that we are not navigating all this by ourselves? Now, at the same time, where might you be called to be that presence for someone else? Who in your life needs an advocate? Who needs encouragement? Who needs someone to stand alongside them and remind them that they're not alone? Because the promise of the Spirit isn't just something we receive, it's something that reshapes how we live. It invites us into a life that reflects the life that we've been given. So on this day, when we give thanks for mothers and for all those who have nurtured us, maybe we can also take a moment to notice the deeper thread running through it all. The quiet persistence that does not leave. The voice that continues to guide. The love that holds on even when everything else changes. That's the gift that Jesus is pointing towards. Not abandonment, but accompaniment. Not absence, but a new kind of presence. And once you begin to recognize it, and you start to see it everywhere, it gives you the courage to keep going. In the compassion that surprises you, in the people who show up at just the right time. You are not alone. You have help. You are held. And you are sent to do the same. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.